Kofi Mensah adjusted the strap of his backpack as he stepped onto the jet bridge, the cool hum of the air-conditioned corridor wrapping around him like a quiet promise. It was late afternoon in Atlanta, the kind of sticky summer day that clung to your skin even indoors. But inside the airport, everything felt crisp and controlled. He'd been through this routine more times than he could count. Boarding passes, security lines, the familiar shuffle down narrow airplane aisles. But this trip felt different in a good way. He was heading to Lagos to spend the summer with his grandmother, the woman who taught him how to make jollof rice with just the right amount of time, and who still called him my little scholar every time they spoke on the phone. At 17, Kofi wasn't a kid anymore, but he wasn't quite an adult either. He stood somewhere in between, old enough to fly alone, young enough that his mom still packed him extra socks, just in case. He wore a navy hoodie, not because he was trying to look cool, but because it was soft and familiar, like a security blanket you could wear in public. His jeans were slightly faded, his sneakers clean but well-worn. In his backpack was a laptop, a copy of Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart for Summer Reading, and a small photo of his family taken last Christmas. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just a teenager heading home, not to the house he grew up in, but to the place that still felt like home in his bones. As he walked down the jet bridge toward the open door of the plane, he glanced at his boarding pass one last time. Seat 23F. Window. Perfect. He liked watching the clouds drift by, liked the way the world shrank into patchwork fields and winding rivers from 30,000 feet up. It made everything feel smaller, more manageable. Even the stress of senior year looming ahead, college applications, final exams, figuring out who he wanted to become, felt lighter up there. The cabin was nearly full when he stepped inside. The scent of coffee and faint disinfectant hung in the air. Overhead bins clicked shut. A baby fussed softly a few rows back. A flight attendant stood near the front, clipboard in hand, nodding politely as passengers passed. Kofi gave her a small smile as he walked by. She didn't return it. Her eyes flickered over him just for a second, but it was enough to make him pause. Not in fear, not even in suspicion, but in that quiet, familiar way black boys learn early. The kind of look that says, I don't know you, but I'm already deciding what you are. He kept walking. He found his seat, stowed his backpack carefully under the seat in front of him, and slid into the window spot. The man in the aisle seat gave a quick nod and went back to his magazine. Kofi pulled out his laptop, opened a blank document, and began typing. He was finishing an essay on post-colonial identity in African literature, something he actually cared about, not just another school assignment. His headphones slipped over his ears, playing a lo-fi study playlist his cousin had sent him. The world outside his window blurred into motion as ground crew moved around the tarmac. And inside the cabin, the low murmur of conversation settled like background static. He didn't notice the two flight attendants whispering near the galley. Didn't see the way one of them glanced toward his row, then leaned in to say something urgent to the other. He was focused on his words, on the rhythm of his thoughts, on the calm before the long flight ahead. But someone was watching. 10 minutes before departure, the cabin door was still open, and the final passengers were being seated. That's when two men in dark uniforms stepped onto the plane, airport security. They moved with purpose, not running but not wasting time either. They walked straight down the aisle past rows of curious faces until they stopped at 23F. Sir, one of them said, voice low but firm. We need you to come with us. Kofi looked up confused. Me? Yes, you. Please stand up, he blinked, closed his laptop slowly. Why? Did I do something wrong? We just need you to step off the aircraft for a moment. But my flight's about to leave. Now, please. The cabin had gone quiet. People turned in their seats. A woman in row 20 covered her mouth. The man next to Kofi shifted away slightly as if guilt might be contagious. Kofi stood. He kept his hands visible, palms open, something his father had taught him years ago, after a routine traffic stop that lasted 40 minutes.
Can I at least take my backpack?
He asked. No, the officer said. It'll be handled. The word felt cold. Impersonal. Like he was a package, not a person. As he walked back up the aisle, he felt dozens of eyes on him. Some curious, some embarrassed. Most just relieved it wasn't them. No one spoke. No one asked what was happening. No one said, Hey, he was just sitting there. Outside the plane, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the jet bridge, the air felt heavier. One of the officers held his elbow, not roughly but firmly as they guided him toward a side corridor. "Wait here," he said, pointing to a small waiting area with plastic chairs and a vending machine that was out of water. Kofi sat. His heart pounded, but his face stayed calm. He'd been here before. Not exactly like this, but close enough. The time a store clerk followed him for 20 minutes. The time a teacher assumed he cheated because his essay was too good. The time a security guard at a museum asked him 3 times for his ticket while white kids walked right in. Each time he'd swallowed the sting, told himself it wasn't personal. But this? Being pulled off a plane in front of strangers? This felt like a line had been crossed. He took a slow breath. Then another. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was hurt and confused and deeply, deeply tired. After a few minutes, a gate agent approached, clipboard in hand. "Are you Kofi Mensah?" she asked. Yes, she didn't look at him, just tapped her screen. "Your bag is being held for inspection." "For what reason?" She hesitated. "Security concern." "What security concern?" "I was typing on my laptop." "I don't have those details," he wanted to argue, to demand answers, but he knew how that could go. So he stayed quiet, nodded, waited. Then he remembered his phone. It was still in his pocket. He'd tucked it away before boarding. "Can I use my phone?" he asked. The agent glanced at the officers. One shrugged. "Make it quick." Kofi pulled it out. His fingers trembled slightly as he unlocked it. He scrolled past texts from his mom. "Don't forget your malaria pills." And his best friend, "Send pics of your grandma's kitchen," until he found the contact he needed. He pressed call. It rang twice. "Hey, Kofi," his dad answered, voice warm, relaxed. Probably at his desk, maybe reviewing flight schedules or reading a report. Normal evening stuff, Kofi swallowed. "Dad, they just pulled me off the plane." A beat of silence. Not the kind that meant disbelief. The kind that meant everything had just shifted. "Where are you?" Kwame asked, voice suddenly sharp, focused. "Atlanta, Gate B14. They say it's a security concern, but I didn't do anything." "I was just sitting there." Another pause. Then calm but certain. "Stay where you are. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone else. I'm calling operations." The call ended. Kofi lowered the phone. Around him, the airport buzzed. Announcements over the loudspeaker, rolling suitcases, laughter from a family heading to their gate. Life moved on as if nothing had happened. As if a boy hadn't just been treated like a threat for existing quietly in a space he'd paid to be in. He looked down at his hands. They were clean. His clothes were neat. His ticket was valid. His intentions were pure. None of that mattered, apparently. But something else did. Because his father wasn't just any businessman. Kwame Mensah had built Horizon Skies from nothing. A dream born in a tiny office above a laundromat, fueled by a belief that air travel shouldn't feel like a privilege reserved for some. He'd fought for routes that connected overlooked cities, hired crews that reflected the world's diversity, and insisted on training that went beyond smile and serve to include real conversations about bias and dignity. And now, his son, the boy he'd taught to speak softly but stand tall, was sitting in a cold hallway, humiliated for no reason. Kofi didn't know what would happen next. But as he sat there watching planes take off through the distant windows, he felt something unexpected, not fear, but resolve. If this was how the system worked, then maybe it was time someone reminded it what fairness really looked like. He didn't cry, didn't yell, just sat straighter in his chair, eyes forward, waiting, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm while the world realizes it made a mistake. Kwame Mensah didn't yell when he hung up the phone. He didn't slam his fist on the desk or curse under his breath. He just sat very still for a few seconds, the way he always did when something serious landed in his lap. Outside his office window, the sun was dipping behind the Atlanta skyline, painting the glass towers in gold and orange. But inside, the air felt colder, sharper, like the moment before a storm breaks. He picked up his desk phone and dialed a 4-digit extension. "Get me Adebayo now." Adebayo Okoro was head of global security for Horizon Skies, the man Kwame trusted more than anyone to handle things with both strength and sense. Within 30 seconds, Adebayo was on the line. "Kofi's been removed from Flight 287 in Atlanta," Kwame said, voice low but urgent. "No reason given. Just pulled off like he was a threat. I need eyes on that gate. Full footage. Passenger logs. Crew statements. And I need it before that plane leaves the tarmac." "Understood," Adebayo replied without hesitation. "I'll call the airport liaison myself." Kwame ended the call and immediately dialed again, this time to the airline's chief operations officer. "Cancel the departure of Flight 287, he said. "Do not let that plane push back until I say so." "But sir, there are 180 passengers." "Then they'll wait," Kwame cut in, not unkindly, but with a tone that left no room for debate. "My son was removed without cause. That's not just a personal issue. It's a failure of our values, and we will not fly a single mile until it's addressed." He stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked out of his office. His assistant, seeing him head for the elevator, called after him. "Mr. Mensah, your 6 o'clock is—" "Reschedule everything," he said over his shoulder. "I'm going to the airport." He didn't wait for a car service. He drove himself, fast but steady, through the evening traffic, his mind racing not with anger but with clarity. This wasn't just about Kofi. It was about every young person who'd ever been made to feel out of place in a space they belonged in, every traveler who'd been watched, questioned, or removed because of how they looked, not what they'd done. Horizon Skies had been built on the promise that air travel could be human, fair, and respectful. If that promise had been broken even once, it needed to be fixed, and fast. Back at the gate, Kofi still sat in the same plastic chair, his phone now tucked away. He watched as a new wave of tension moved through the terminal. Gate agents whispered into headsets. Supervisors hurried past with tight expressions. Even the security officers who'd escorted him off seemed uneasy now, glancing toward the jet bridge like they expected something to happen. Inside the plane, confusion had turned to frustration. Passengers checked their watches. A woman tried to nap but kept opening her eyes, annoyed. Then a man in row 14 stood up. He was in his 50s, wearing a dashiki and wire-rimmed glasses, a book on Yoruba philosophy resting on his tray table. "Excuse me," he said, voice calm but firm, addressing the nearest flight attendant. "That young man you removed, what exactly did he do?" The attendant stiffened. "It was a security matter, sir. We can't discuss details, but I saw him," the man said. He was typing on his laptop. "Didn't speak to anyone. Didn't move around. Are we now removing passengers for reading?" A few people murmured in agreement. Another passenger, an older woman with silver braids, added, "He looked like my grandson. Quiet, polite. You just dragged him off like he was dangerous." The flight attendant didn't respond. She turned and walked toward the front of the cabin, radioing the cockpit. Up in the flight deck, Captain Elena Ruiz, no relation to the gate supervisor of the same name, was reviewing pre-flight checks when the call came through from the cabin crew. She listened, frowning. "They removed a passenger without consulting the captain?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. "Yes, ma'am. Security came on board directly." Elena exhaled sharply. "That wasn't protocol. Not even close. Every Horizon Skies pilot knew. If there's a concern about a passenger, you assess it together. Crew, captain, and ground security. You don't just yank someone off based on a hunch." She picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay due to an operational review. Please remain seated. We appreciate your patience." Then she called ground control. "What's going on with passenger removal on 287? The response was hesitant. "We're looking into it." Elena's jaw tightened. She'd flown for Horizon Skies for 12 years. She'd seen the company grow, watched Kwame Mensah speak at crew orientations about dignity, inclusion, and second chances. And now this? It didn't sit right. Meanwhile, in a small office near Gate B14, Elena Ruiz, the gate supervisor, not the pilot, was watching the security footage for the third time. She'd pulled it up the moment she heard Kofi's name. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. But when she cross-referenced his emergency contact with the corporate directory, her stomach dropped. Kwame Mensah, founder, CEO, the man whose face was on every employee welcome packet. She immediately called her manager, Darnell, who was overseeing the evening shift. "We have a serious problem," she said, voice low. "The kid they pulled off? His dad owns the airline." There was a long pause. "You're joking." I wish I was, and he's on his way here. Right now, Darnell cursed under his breath. Who authorized the removal? The lead flight attendant, Lena Cho. Said he seemed off. Wouldn't make eye contact, kept looking out the window too much. Elena Ruiz shook her head. That's not suspicious. That's a kid on a long flight. She hung up and did something she wasn't supposed to. She walked to the holding area and found Kofi still sitting there, alone. She didn't introduce herself as management, just sat in the chair next to him. Rough day, she said gently. Kofi looked at her surprised. Yeah, I saw what happened, she continued. You didn't deserve that. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then quietly, people say that after, but no one says it when it's happening. She nodded. I know. Before she could say more, a commotion broke out near the security checkpoint. A man in a linen shirt and slacks was walking toward them, moving with a calm intensity that made everyone step aside. Airport staff straightened up. Security guards exchanged nervous glances. Kofi stood as his father approached. Kwame didn't hug him right away. Didn't make a scene. He just looked at his son, really looked and saw the hurt beneath the composure. You okay? He asked. Kofi nodded. Embarrassed? Not hurt? Kwame placed a hand on his shoulder. You did nothing wrong. Then he turned to Elena Ruiz, who had risen to her feet. You're the supervisor? Yes, sir. Elena Ruiz. Thank you for sitting with him, she swallowed. I wanted him to know someone saw what happened. Kwame gave a small nod of respect. Then he turned to the security team. I want every person involved in this decision identified. I want the full timeline, and I want the CCTV footage preserved. No edits. No deletions. One of the officers started to speak, but Kwame held up a hand. Not now, not to me. You'll speak to our internal review team, and you'll speak to the truth. He turned back to Kofi. Let's get you somewhere comfortable. As they walked toward the executive lounge, Kofi finally let out the breath he'd been holding. Dad, do you think they'll say sorry? Kwame didn't answer right away. They passed a family laughing over ice cream, a couple holding hands, a little girl chasing bubbles near a fountain. Normal airport life, full of warmth, connection, movement. Sorry isn't enough, Kwame said finally. What matters is change. If this happened to you, it's happened to others. And it stops today. Inside the quiet lounge, away from the noise of the terminal, Kofi sank into a plush chair. A staff member brought him water without being asked. Kwame sat across from him, pulling out his phone. Flight 287 is grounded, he said. No one's going anywhere until we sort this out. Kofi looked up, surprised. Because of me? Because of what they did, Kwame corrected gently. Not because of you. He made 3 more calls. 1 to legal, 1 to communications, 1 to the head of crew training. By the time he finished, the wheels were already turning, not for revenge, but for repair. Back on the plane, passengers were getting restless. 40 minutes had passed, then 50. A flight attendant tried to hand out snacks to calm nerves, but people weren't interested in crackers. They wanted answers. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom again. This time, different, slower, more personal. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Elena Ruiz began. I've just been informed that the passenger removed from this flight was Mr. Kofi Mensah, the son of Horizon Sky's founder. He was taken off based on a misjudgment by our cabin crew. He did nothing wrong. In fact, he's been a passenger with us for years, always respectful, always quiet. Out of respect for him, and for the values our airline stands for, I've requested that he be allowed to reboard. However, given what happened, Mr. Mensah has chosen not to. The cabin fell silent. Then from the back, someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then more people joined. Not loud or dramatic, just a quiet show of solidarity. A few passengers wiped their eyes. Others looked down, ashamed. The flight attendant stood frozen in the galley, faces pale. Lena Cho, the one who'd flagged Kofi, gripped the edge of the counter. She hadn't meant to cause this. She just felt uneasy, but now she saw it. Unease wasn't enough. Not when it cost someone their dignity. Kwame, meanwhile, wasn't thinking about punishment. He was thinking about systems, about training, about the quiet ways bias creeps in, even in companies that try to do better. He turned to Kofi. Do you want to go home tonight? Kofi shook his head. Not on that plane. Good, Kwame said. Because I've got our corporate jet warming up. We'll fly commercial another time, but tonight you fly with your head high. Kofi managed a small smile. Thanks, Dad. As they prepared to leave the lounge, Kwame paused. One more thing. He pulled out his phone and recorded a short voice memo. Effective immediately. All Horizon Skies crew members will undergo mandatory retraining on implicit bias, de-escalation, and passenger rights. Suspensions are pending for those involved, and we will launch a new initiative to ensure young people like my son never feel unwelcome in our skies again. He hit send. The message went to every department head, every regional manager, every crew base around the world. Outside, the Atlanta night hummed with life. Planes taxied. Cars honked. Somewhere, a saxophone played near the food court, and inside the terminal, a father and son walked side by side, not as CEO and passenger, but as two people who just witnessed how fragile fairness can be, and how fiercely it must be protected. The next morning, the airport felt different, not quieter exactly, but heavier, like everyone was walking on tiptoe around something unspoken. Kofi sat at the kitchen table in his dad's Atlanta condo, wrapped in a soft blanket, sipping ginger tea his father had made without being asked. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting neat lines across the floor. It should have felt peaceful, but Kofi couldn't shake the image of those two security officers standing over him, or the silence of the passengers who watched him get led away like he was guilty of something. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flight attendant's face, the way her eyes narrowed just slightly when he walked past, like she was already writing a story about him in her head. He'd replayed the moment over and over, searching for what he might have done wrong. Did he look nervous? Had he moved too quickly? Was his hoodie too big? The questions looped like a broken record, even though he knew deep down the truth. It wasn't about what he did. It was about who he was. Kwame sat across from him, reading a report on his tablet. He hadn't pushed Kofi to talk, hadn't filled the silence with advice or pep talks. He just let him be. That was one of the things Kofi admired most about his dad. He knew when to speak and when to simply exist beside you. After a while, Kwame set the tablet down. Elena Ruiz, the gate supervisor, called this morning, he said gently. She wanted to make sure you were okay. Kofi nodded. She was kind. The only one who actually looked at me like I was a person. She also sent over the full security footage, Kwame added, and the internal log from the crew. Kofi didn't ask to see it. He already knew what it would show. Him sitting quietly, typing, glancing out the window, nothing more. But Kwame had watched it 3 times. Each time his jaw tightened a little more. They flagged you for avoiding eye contact and frequent window gazing, Kwame said, voice flat. As if looking out at the sky is a crime. It's what people do on planes, Kofi said, almost laughing, though there was no humor in it. Unless you're supposed to stare straight ahead like a robot? Kwame didn't smile. No, you're supposed to be allowed to just... Cheers, he leaned forward, elbows on the table. I've asked the 2 flight attendants to come in for a meeting this afternoon. Not a disciplinary hearing. A conversation. I want to understand how this happened, not to punish, but to fix. Kofi raised an eyebrow. You're not firing them? I might, Kwame said honestly. But not before I hear them out. Because if this was just one bad call, we can train. But if it's part of a pattern, if they've done this before to other passengers, then it's bigger than 2 people. It's about the culture we've allowed to grow. Kofi thought about that. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want someone to lose their job over a mistake, even a painful one. But he also didn't want this to happen to someone else. Someone who didn't have a father who owned the airline. Someone who wouldn't be believed. Someone who might not walk away unscathed. Later that day, Kwame drove to Horizon Skies regional headquarters, a sleek glass building near the airport, filled with murals of African cities and quotes from poets like Maya Angelou and Wole Soyinka. In a small conference room on the 4th floor, 2 women sat waiting. Lena Cho and Tasha Bell. Both had worked for the airline for over 5 years. Both had clean records. Both looked like they hadn't slept either. Kwame didn't sit at the head of the table. He pulled up a chair beside them, like they were colleagues, not suspects. Thank you for coming, he said. Lena, the lead attendant, kept her eyes down. Tasha twisted a tissue in her hands. I know this is hard, Kwame continued, but I need honesty. Not excuses. Just truth. Why did you call security on Kofi? Lena took a shaky breath. He seemed off. He didn't smile when he boarded. He kept looking out the window like he was watching for something. And when I walked by, he didn't look up. Did you speak to him? Kwame asked. No. Did you ask if he was okay? No. Did you consider that maybe he was tired? Or focused? Or just not in the mood to perform friendliness for strangers? Lena flinched. I guess I didn't think that far. Tasha finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. I saw him typing fast on his laptop. And his hoodie. It was big. I know that sounds stupid now, but I just got this feeling. A feeling, Kwame repeated softly. And that feeling was enough to have him removed from a flight he paid for? To humiliate him in front of strangers? Neither woman answered. The silence stretched. Then Kwame leaned back. You both went through our cultural sensitivity training. You know our policy. If you have a concern, you assess it calmly. You talk to the passenger. You involve the captain. You don't escalate to security based on a gut feeling. Especially not when that feeling is shaped by things you can't even name. He paused. Do you understand why this is dangerous? Lena nodded, tears welling. I do now. I really do. I thought I was being careful. But I see. I was being biased. Kwame didn't soften. But he didn't harden either. Bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. A glance, a hesitation, a story we tell ourselves about someone we don't know. And that quiet bias can do real harm. He stood. You're both suspended for 2 weeks with pay. During that time, you'll meet with our new bias response team, former civil rights advocates, psychologists, and community leaders. You'll listen. You'll reflect. And you'll decide, do you want to be part of fixing this or do you walk away? Tasha looked up surprised. We're not fired? You made a serious error, Kwame said. But Horizon Skies isn't about perfection. It's about growth. If you're willing to learn, we're willing to give you the chance. Later that afternoon, Kofi met with Elena Ruiz, not the pilot, but the gate supervisor who'd sat with him the day before. She'd requested the meeting, nervous but determined. They met at a quiet cafe near the airport, away from the buzz of terminals and announcements. Elena ordered black coffee. Kofi got a mango smoothie. I wanted to apologize in person, she said, stirring her cup. Not as management, just as someone who saw what happened and didn't stop it soon enough. Kofi studied her face. She looked tired, sincere. You did more than most, he said. You sat with me. That meant something. I should have done more, she insisted. I saw the footage. I knew it was wrong. But I didn't speak up until I realized who your dad was, and that's messed up. Kofi nodded slowly. Yeah, it is. But I want to help fix it, she added quickly. If you're starting something, some kind of program or training, I'd like to be part of it. Kofi hadn't planned on starting anything. But the idea took root right then. What if young people, especially black and brown teens, could learn how to navigate spaces like airports with confidence? What if they could be taught their rights, how to stay calm under pressure, how to document incidents? And what if airline staff could hear directly from them, not as threats but as human beings? I've been thinking about a club at school, he said slowly. Call it Clear Skies, about fairness in travel, youth voices, stuff like that. Maybe you could come speak?
Tell your side.
Not to defend what happened, but to show how even good people can slip up. And how they can do better. Elena's eyes lit up. I'd be honored. That evening, Kwame and Kofi sat on the balcony, watching planes streak across the twilight sky. The city hummed below. Cars, distant sirens, the occasional laugh from a neighboring balcony. Dad, Kofi said after a while, what if this just becomes a news story? People get mad for a week, then forget? Kwame sipped his tea. Then we make sure it's more than a story. We make it a turning point. He told Kofi about the new initiative he was launching, the Mensa Fellowship. Full scholarships for young people of color to train as pilots, engineers, flight attendants. Mentorship. Paid internships. A pipeline into an industry that's still too white, too male, too closed off. But I don't want it named after me, Kofi said quickly. Kwame smiled. It won't be. It'll be called Horizon Futures. But everyone will know why it exists. Kofi looked out at the sky again, the same sky he'd been staring at when they pulled him off the plane. Only now it felt different. Not like a place he had to prove himself in, but a place he belonged, fully and without question. And maybe, just maybe, because of what happened, others would feel that way too. 2 weeks after the incident, the buzz around Horizon Skies hadn't died down. It had deepened. News outlets had covered the story, yes, but what surprised everyone was how the conversation kept going. Not just online, but in crew break rooms, airport lounges, even high school classrooms. People weren't just talking about what happened to Kofi. They were asking bigger questions. Who gets the benefit of the doubt in public spaces? Who gets treated like a guest and who gets treated like a suspect? Kwame had made sure the airline didn't hide. Instead of issuing a dry corporate apology, Horizon Skies released a full transparency report, redacted but honest. It included the timeline of Kofi's removal, the names of the policies that were ignored, and the steps being taken to prevent it from ever happening again. Most strikingly, it included a short video message from Kwame himself, filmed not in a boardroom but in the same Atlantic gate where it all began. "I built this airline because I believed flying should feel human," he said, standing near gate B14, voice steady. "Not cold, not suspicious, not divided by who you are or what you look like. What happened to my son broke that promise. And while I can't undo the hurt, I can make sure it leads to something better." The video went viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Meanwhile, Kofi had returned to school. He'd expected whispers, maybe even some awkward questions. But what he got instead was something quieter, more powerful. Respect. Not pity, not fame. Just a quiet acknowledgement from teachers and classmates that he'd handled something unfair with grace. A few students even asked if they could join the Clear Skies Club he'd mentioned to Elena. By the end of the first week, 20 kids had signed up. They met in the library after school, sitting in a loose circle of mismatched chairs. Kofi didn't lead like a boss. He listened. They talked about times they'd been followed in stores, questioned for no reason, told to calm down when they were just excited. One girl shared how she'd been stopped at an amusement park entrance because her ticket didn't look real, even though it was printed on the same paper as everyone else's. A boy talked about being asked for ID at a coffee shop while his white friend ordered the same drink without a second glance. It wasn't about blame, it was about naming the pattern, so they could break it. Elena Ruiz came to their second meeting, as promised. She didn't wear her Horizon Skies uniform, just jeans and a simple blouse. She brought printed handouts, a passenger's rights guide, tips for staying calm during security checks, and a list of organizations that offer legal support for travel discrimination. "I'm not here to defend the airline," she told the group. "I'm here because I saw something wrong and didn't act fast enough, and I don't want anyone else to feel what Kofi felt." After she spoke, a quiet girl named Naya raised her hand. "What if speaking up makes it worse? Like, what if they get angrier?" Elena nodded. "That's real. Sometimes staying safe means staying quiet in the moment. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. Document it. Get names. Ask for supervisor contact info. And tell someone afterward. Your family, a teacher, an advocacy group. Silence protects the system. Your voice can change it." Kofi watched the room. Saw shoulders straighten. Saw eyes meet for the first time without shame. This wasn't just a club. It was a lifeline. Back at Horizon Skies headquarters, real change was taking shape too. The mandatory anti-bias training wasn't just a slideshow anymore. It was a 2-day workshop co-designed with civil rights lawyers and psychologists. Flight. Attendance role-played scenarios. What do you do if a passenger seems anxious? How do you check your own assumptions before acting? What does suspicious behavior really look like? And how often is it just someone being human? Lena and Tasha, the 2 attendants involved in Kofi's removal, chose to stay. They attended every session. Lena even volunteered to help design a new passenger dignity module, drawing from her own regret. "I thought I was being professional," she told a group of new hires. "But professionalism shouldn't mean suspicion. It should mean seeing people clearly." Kwame made one more bold move. He invited a panel of young travelers, diverse in race, background, and experience, to sit with Horizon Skies' leadership team once a month. Their job wasn't to praise the airline, but to challenge it. To ask hard questions, to say, "This policy still feels off," or, "Your staff smiled but their eyes said something else." At the first meeting, a 16-year-old named Zara looked Kwame straight in the eye and said, "You fixed what happened to Kofi. But what about the kid who doesn't have a CEO for a dad? Who gets removed and no one listens? Kwame didn't deflect. You're right, he said. So we're creating an independent passenger review board, staffed by community advocates, not airline employees. Anyone who feels mistreated can file a report and it'll be investigated by people with no stake in protecting us. Zara nodded slowly. Okay, that's a start. The real test came a month later, when another incident nearly repeated itself, this time in Chicago. A young black man, boarding a Horizon Skies flight to Nairobi, was questioned by a gate agent who said his ticket looked unusual. But this time, the agent followed protocol. She called a supervisor, verified the ticket, and apologized for the delay. The passenger later wrote to the airline, not to complain, but to thank them for handling it with respect. Kwame read that letter aloud at the next leadership meeting. This, he said, holding it up, is the standard, not perfection, just humanity. Back in Atlanta, Kofi received an unexpected invitation. Horizon Skies was launching its first Youth Ambassador program, a select group of students who'd fly first class on select routes to observe operations, meet crew members, and give feedback. Not as VIPs, but as partners in building a better travel experience. He almost said no. The idea of stepping back onto a Horizon Skies plane still made his stomach twist. But then he thought about the kids in his club, about Zara's question, about the boy in Chicago who was treated fairly because someone had learned from a mistake. He said yes. The flight was scheduled for a Saturday morning, Atlanta to Accra, a route his father had fought hard to establish years ago. This time, there was no hoodie, no nervous energy. Kofi wore a crisp white shirt, dark slacks, and the small wooden pendant his grandmother had sent him for protection. He walked through security with his head high, not to prove anything, but because he finally believed he belonged. At the gate, a new flight attendant greeted him by name. Mr. Mensah, welcome aboard. We've been expecting you. Her smile was warm. Her eyes met his without hesitation. No suspicion, no story already written. As he stepped onto the plane, he noticed something different. The crew didn't just see a passenger. They saw a person. And for the first time in a long time, Kofi felt seen not as a threat, not as a symbol, but simply as himself. He settled into his seat, this time in first class, though it didn't feel like a reward. It felt like a responsibility. He pulled out his notebook, not to write an essay, but to jot down ideas for the next Clear Skies meeting. How to talk to airline staff when you feel uneasy. What to do if you witness bias, or why representation in aviation matters. Outside, the engines hummed to life. The plane began to taxi. Kofi looked out the window as the runway stretched ahead, the city shrinking behind him. He wasn't just flying to Accra. He was flying towards something bigger, a future where no one had to prove they deserved to be in the sky. And this time, the sky felt like it was holding him, not watching him. Months passed, and the story that began with a quiet teenager being pulled off a plane settled into something deeper, something quieter, but more lasting. Kofi didn't become a viral sensation. He didn't give interviews or pose for magazine covers. He went back to school, finished his college applications, and kept showing up to Clear Skies meetings every Thursday after lunch. The club had grown, now nearly 50 students from all backgrounds, all with stories of being made to feel out of place somewhere they had every right to be. They organized workshops, wrote letters to local transit authorities, and even partnered with a civil rights nonprofit to create a pocket-sized traveler's rights card that fit in a wallet. Kofi carried one himself, not because he expected trouble, but because he wanted to be ready, not with anger, but with knowledge. At home, things had changed too. Kwame still ran Horizon Skies, but he'd stepped back from day-to-day operations just enough to listen more. He started eating dinner with Kofi most nights, not talking about business, but about books, music, the way the light hit the trees in their backyard. They didn't mention the incident often, but it lived between them like a shared understanding, a reminder that fairness isn't given, it's built, one honest conversation at a time. The real surprise came from the two flight attendants, Lena and Tasha. After completing their retraining, they didn't disappear. Instead, they asked to help lead Horizon Sky's new Crew Compass program, a peer-led initiative where veteran staff mentored new hires on not just safety procedures, but empathy, cultural awareness, and de-escalation. Lena even spoke at a national aviation conference, not as a cautionary tale, but as someone who'd learned, stumbled, and chosen to grow. "I used to think being professional meant staying neutral," she told a room of airline trainers. "But neutrality can be its own kind of harm. Real professionalism means seeing people, really seeing them and treating them like they matter even when you're tired, even when you're stressed, even when they don't look like you." Her words were met with a standing ovation, not because she was perfect, but because she was honest. Back in Atlanta, Elena Ruiz, the gate supervisor who'd sat with Kofi that day, was promoted to lead Horizon Sky's new passenger experience and equity division. It wasn't a flashy title, but it was powerful. She now oversaw everything from staff training to complaint resolution with one rule: every decision had to pass the Kofi test. Would this policy, this response, this interaction make someone like Kofi feel respected or erased? She never forgot that moment in the holding area, the quiet dignity in his eyes even as he was being treated like a problem. It became her compass. Kofi's grandmother back in Lagos had watched the whole story unfold from afar. She didn't understand all the details: airlines, corporate policies, bias training, but she understood people. When Kofi,